Vivi l'arte con nuove emozioni. Umbria, cuore verde d'Italia.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very special session in this incredibly beautiful venue, hosted by the IPI Global Network of editors, journalists and publishers. I'm Jacqui Park. I'm IPI's Head of Network Strategy and Innovation. Since the full escalation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February last year, we've all really been keeping an eye on, what is really, one of the biggest news stories of our time. And I think for the journalism community, what has been most interesting, one of the most interesting elements of that story is how Ukraine's independent media has responded in such, with such courage and creativity. Last year, we, IPI and International Media Support, were delighted to recognise the work of 7 leading Ukrainian media organisations with the 2022 IPI-IMS Free Media Pioneer Award. Those 7 represented the diversity of the Ukrainian independent media community, striving to provide really high-quality news and information under incredibly difficult circumstances. The 7 media are ABO Media Agency, Hromadski, Slidstvo.info, Stop Fake, the Kyiv Independent, Ukrayina and Ukrayinska Pravda. And today we're delighted to have 3 of them here represented, each of them playing a different role in the country's media ecosystem, and here to tell their story of innovation and journalism on democracy's front line. So please welcome, on my left, Daryna Shevchenko from the Kyiv Independent, the country's leading English language voice, which was launched itself in repudiation of oligarch control just 3 months before the invasion in 2022. To my right is Sevgil Musaieva from Ukrayinska Pravda, an early digital Ukrainian voice founded in 2000 by Georgy Gongadze. And tragically, he was murdered just 5 months later, and I'm pleased to welcome in the audience today his wife, Miroslava. In 2016, tragedy struck again with Pavel Sheremet, who was killed then in a car bombing. And on my furthest right is Lera Lauda from ABO Local Media Agency, which has had the task since 2015 of helping to guide the local and regional media in Ukraine to rebuild and transition and to sustainability. So I thought we could start by, with an opportunity for each of you to talk a little bit and introduce your organisation. So if I start with Ukrayinska Pravda, you're one of the most enduring digital native voices, not just in Ukraine, of course, but globally, I think, starting in 2000. And you have, with the murders, really paid the highest of prices in the press freedom struggle in Ukraine. How do you see your history and where you are now?
Thank you, Jacqui. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your interest to this topic and to Ukraine, of course. I would love to share the story. The story of Ukrayinska Pravda is, I think that I can spend almost 1 hour talking about Ukrayinska Pravda, but I will be short. So it was founded in 2000 by 2 journalists, Georgy Gongadze and Olena Pritula. Freedom market during this time was under censorship, and then you're absolutely right that after 5 months, Ukrayinska Pravda was launched. Our founder disappeared. Then it became one of the most difficult political cases in the history of modern Ukraine. It led accusation against government because our actually former president was accused in this murder. And it led to protest, first protest Ukraine without Kuchma, then to Orange Revolution. We covered Ukrayinska Pravda covered Orange Revolution, and we played significant role in coverage of two revolutions actually, Orange Revolution and then Revolution of Dignity. That's why responsibility in the beginning of war was very high. And you're absolutely right that unfortunately two of our journalists were killed for 23 years. Actually, 1 week ago we celebrated our 23rd anniversary in circumstances of full-scale war. But we had this experience, we experienced difficult times, but what we experienced last year and overcome last year, of course, I would love to share. Thank you.
Okay. And Daryna, the Kyiv Independent, independence was really your founding stone, I guess, your declaration, and you were formed as a rejection of oligarch control. So can you tell us a bit about the founding story?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for coming. Thank you for having us here in this beautiful location. Yes, Kyiv Independent was founded by an independent newsroom that used to be a newsroom of the Kyiv Post, Ukraine's legacy English language voice. But unfortunately, the owner of the Kyiv Post shut down the paper just 3 months before the full-scale invasion. He decided, he wouldn't need independent journalism anymore, and the newsroom wouldn't take it. So the newsroom left and decided to set up a new entity. I wasn't working at the Post back then, but I'm also the Post alumni. I worked at the Post for many years before. By that time, I was a media manager with the Genomics Media Consultancy, an international consulting company. And, you know, we reached out and we partnered and decided to start a new media outlet together. And that's what happened. That's how Kyiv Independent was started. I think independence is in our DNA. So, you know, it's never a question for us whether we should stay independent or dependent someone reach to fund us. We're trying to do it on our own.
Yeah, great. And Lera, so ABO Media Agency was founded in 2015, yeah, in response to, it's called the destatization, so the kind of separation of the local media from the local funding from local authorities, and at the same time it was really with an investment in the digital infrastructure. So tell us a little bit about the founding
hi
story.
all. Hi all, and again, thank you for coming. My organization has been working with local media for the last 6 years. And we launched 50 local media around Ukraine and in small towns and communities. When I say small town, I mean town with population from 10,000 people till probably 50 or 80,000. And yes, as said Jacqui, when we came to the local market, local media market, we knew that it was weak. I mean, there were a lot of local editorial offices, and they all have newspapers. It's great, but almost nobody had a website. And if they had, these websites were totally usability unfriendly. Yeah. So what did we, and what was our idea? We developed our own content management system, our platform, and this platform allows us to launch a new media website in 2 or 3 days. And right now, it costs nothing for this local media. Because previously, and actually now also, we know that these local editors and owners, they don't have enough knowledges and actually money to launch their own website, to write all technical specification to web developers, etc., etc. And we gave them this tool. And also, it's not only about a platform, about a website, it's also about the support of this media in different ways, because we have editors, designers, a lot of different specialists who are working with this media on a daily basis, and we help them to go online easy. Yeah. And as I said, we launched 50 media before the war started, but right now we have already 60 local media. Most of these newly created media are located in towns and communities near the front line, and the rest of them in different towns in Ukraine, but we founded this media together with editors and journalists who moved from the eastern and from the eastern part of Ukraine. These people, they lost almost all what they had, and they had to move to another town to be safe. And now we help them to launch new media, and I hope in future new business, media business. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's incredible. So let's talk a little bit about audience now and how those needs have changed and what audiences are expecting. So with Ukrayinska Pravda, you know, like it's was founded as a Ukrainian language. You do also publish now in English?
Yes, we launched English version in the first days of war, actually.
Okay. And you've got a deep history of exposing and covering corruption. But how have the kind of expectations of your community and audience changed over the past year? And how do you meet those?
Maybe you heard a lot of times that there's nothing scary that war, and after this year I would love to maybe add one more sentence. There is nothing scarier than war, painful and tragic, but it is when it's war in your country and you have to cover in daily basis. So we faced you're absolutely right. Before, we covered political issues, we covered corruption. More than 90% of our coverage was about internal issues and about political situation in Ukraine, even a few weeks before the war. But then, of course, we focused more on the war. I remember how the first days of the war, I talked to our people, with our team, and I said, okay, we have to do that. There will be no need in Ukrayinska Pravda if a country will be not able to defend itself, and from our work depends literally everything. And you know, like I told before, that Ukrayinska Pravda played very important and significant role in Orange Revolution of Dignity. That's why people first, actually, they knew about war from our website. It was 4:57 when we posted the story that Putin has launched his war against Ukraine, and then it was just suddenly one working day. So already we have 400 days of this full-scale invasion. But like the first day, the first weeks of the war, we were second largest website in our country after Google, and in first months of the war, we received more than 1 billion pages view of Ukrayinska Pravda, and in first days of war, like 7 million people read us every single day. And I mentioned that we launched also English version. English version was launched by our prominent journalist Daryna Shevchenko, and maybe I would love to share her story, because you know that she absolutely succeeded with a team of volunteers then, and now Ukrayinska Pravda English version has more than 10 people in our team. It's one of the most popular in our country, and unfortunately Alina lost her father during this war. Her father went to frontline, and then it's also about how a team went through this war, because she decided just to have her psychologist therapy, and then she launched her own podcast about that. It's not like war and life balance, it's war and life balance. So this is how actually journalists also going through this war.
Yeah. But are you finding, is there kind of like a war fatigue, like the the stories? Has that changed? And how do you manage that?
Yes, of course. First, people were literally focused on news. We were producing news every single 2 minutes, and all team were focused on news. Then we covered, of course, sanctions, Russian assets. We covered war crimes after Bucha, for example. We were more focused on that. Then we came back to our also political situation in our country, because war doesn't mean that politics stops. So, and we also, even in circumstances of war, we continue to cover corruption story in our country, and actually we succeeded even in that way, because after our investigation, some people with corruption background were fired. So, and but of course people are really tired about the war, and you have to find the new ways how to tell the story about them. Even I understand that literally everywhere now abroad I see kind of faced with Ukraine fatigue, but you can imagine that we live in circumstances of war, and our audience is tired after the 1 year of this war. And for journalism, it's also a big challenge how to find a new way to speak and to tell the stories about this war. First of all, about war crimes, I think, and documenting war crimes.
Yeah. And Daryna, the audience for Kyiv Independent is mostly outside of the country? Is it, and what are the challenges for keeping that audience engaged in, you know, what is this most important time?
Oh yes, definitely. Most of our audience is outside of the country. I think over 90% of the audience is outside of the country. But when we were set up, we knew we are about to be the voice of Ukraine. The problem with that was when the full-scale invasion started, we were barely a startup. So we just registered our legal entities, we just set up our business, and it was taking off just literally. It was months, days, weeks. You know, we weren't an institution like Ukrayinska Pravda. We were a young team of, 18 people back then, I think, who were just ambitious enough to take this on. And in the first days of the invasion, our audience grew, I don't know, probably a dozen times. And it's in millions. I don't think even our website was prepared for that back then, but a lot has changed since then. Yes, our audience is outside of Ukraine. We serve Ukraine stakeholders across the whole world. Mostly, we have a lot of audiences in North America, in the UK, in the Western Europe, in Canada. But also, I think we became, so that's one. There are a lot of people who are somehow connected to Ukraine or are politically involved. There are a lot of decision makers in our audiences. But there are also a lot of people who just found out that Ukraine exists. And I think one thing that we are doing the most is providing context and additional information on how, on what Ukraine is, what Ukraine history is, what Ukraine identity is. We are not just running the news. We are also doing long-format reporting, we're doing investigations, we're doing explanatory journalism in different formats, including video. And I think in the last year, our team grew from, well, twice. We did experience war fatigue, I think more so than Ukrainian media, because in Ukraine, the audiences, it's a life and death matter for them. So it's hard to check out from the news when it's like you have to, make your life decisions on that. But for foreign audiences, a different story. They probably want to have a glass of wine in peace somewhere. And here we are coming with our horrible stories from Ukraine. But I think we've managed to keep finding new and new formats and ways to tell the story about Ukraine, though I have to say this challenge is not solved. This is something we are still doing. We are experimenting a lot, and we are still trying to find new ways to provide more context about Ukraine. So we just launched Ukraine's Through History project. This is a video but also a text story project on our website, explaining Ukraine's history in very simple words for those who never heard of it, but also for those who want to understand what was actually happening in the country and stop depending on Russian narratives in that regard. So that's a very important one for us. We also launched an Explaining Ukraine project, which is a series of evergreen stories about Ukraine's social and political life, about the language issues that has been raised by many Westerners and obviously is based on Russian false narratives. So about all these complex things.
Thank you. Lera, so tell us a little bit about local media, because you can't separate it, I think, also from the business model, you know, the revenues that were really destroyed, right, for a lot of the local media, particularly in the war zones. How have the needs of audiences changed, and how can you serve those?
Yeah, actually local media is about close contact connection with local audiences, and it didn't change. I have really hundreds of stories about how this local media, the materials, publications, how they had an impact to communities and how we helped different people with different situations. Yeah. And for example, we have one small town not far from the front line, and till November last year, in this town there were no like signs with information where the shelters, bomb shelters, are located, and local governments said that it's about like safety because Russians could attack these shelters, but it's in a sense because if you are not near your home, you need quickly to understand where is this safe place, where should you go. So there was a lot of mails, letters, calls to the editorial office, and they published different materials. And in November, we already had these signs. It was like small, yeah, I know, small win. And another one example. Actually, yeah, I didn't say that we have almost 15 local media that are located on temporarily occupied towns in Ukraine. Yeah, and all these media are daily updated by our team. It is important for us because we want to show that there are Ukrainian media in Ukrainian temporarily occupied towns. And we want to share stories of locals who moved. And also we want to have a trusted by locals media and media with a strong position, I know, in searching systems after we win and after we deoccupied our towns and after we start to rebuild them. And actually one story about this audience impact connected to Svatove. It's a small town in Luhansk region, and all governments, institutions were moved, obviously, yeah. But there was no joint information with contacts of different state institutions where people could receive some information, help, etc., etc. And our journalists sent I don't know, more than 20 different official mails, and only in February this year we published the whole information with the whole contacts of all institutions that could be useful for people. And only after all this campaign, we started, this local governments opened a hot phone line for local people. So it's about impact to local audiences.
And I know, because we've had a number of conversations before the war, that you were, doing an incredible job helping local media to build sustainable revenues, right? So with those gone, how how are they now funded?
Yeah, we have destroyed it. Advertising market, it's sad, it's true. But some of our media, they tried to have this, to receive donations for locals. It's only 2 or 3 media that before the war, they already had really strong local media brand. And it helps them right now. But of course, this money, it's not enough for doing your daily operations. And of course, international support. It was something that helped us to really hard, and it was important. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Yeah. So some of media already started to sell some advert. Yeah. We have it, but we are talking about really small amounts of money.
And Sevgil, you told me earlier you were collaborating with the ABO, some of the local media, on the memorial project?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, actually, last year in March, mid-March, we launched a memorial platform. It's right now it's the biggest Ukrainian website with stories about war victims, civilian and soldiers. Our team is a huge team, actually, almost 30 people. We are on a daily basis try to verify all victims and then connect with their relatives and write stories, because our idea is that all these people, they had their lives, stories, relatives. It's not a numbers, not a statistic. And our mission is to write story about each person who was killed by Russians. Now we have already almost 3,000 stories published. And also we have our database with more than 3,000 stories that we need to finish, because yeah, we could do it so quickly. Yeah, and with this platform we have collaborations with all Ukrainian national media and with a lot of regional media. Almost all in the morning, every day, they published one story from Memorial on their pages on social media, part of them on their websites. And it's a huge national campaign about these people. And actually, Ukrayinska Pravda is one of our partners.
Yeah. Daryna, when you're all living the story as well as telling the story, how do you manage that in the newsroom? I must say I was struck at the session that you had with your colleagues a couple of days ago. One of your colleagues talked about how she had learnt to be brave, which was, I just think, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we all in a sense learn to be brave, but I think one of the bravest things that we do is we not just report on the war in our country, we also report on the government of our country at the times of war. It has never been even a question to us. We've always knew that we will have to keep the watchdog function, and it's, we won't sugarcoat whatever Ukrainian government is doing, and it's for Ukraine. If any, we're doing it for Ukraine because we know how important independent journalism is for the building of democracy, and we know how our neighboring countries, including Russia, lost that democracy just because they didn't have a strong enough independent journalism, and we were not about to do the same. And I'm very proud to say that many of my colleagues took on this huge challenge of reporting on both the war in your own country when you're living the story. Some of my colleagues, had relatives in the occupied territories, and they were still reporting. And the others lost their homes, and this is a heartbreaking story. Every story of every person in Ukraine is a heartbreaking one, even if you didn't live through a whole lot, but even a casual story would break anyone's heart. But I think the bravery is to keep doing your job, and that's what our team managed to do, and I'm very proud of every single one of them.
Yeah, thanks. Sevgil, can you talk a little bit about, at this time when war is there, it's sort of, there are stories in every corner. How do you tell the story, I guess, of life in Ukraine in a meaningful way? And the second part of the question is, millions of people, millions of Ukrainians are now living outside of the country. How do you keep them in the story as well, or how do you manage?
I want to add maybe to Daryna's point about this bravery, Ukrainian bravery, and I think that one of the most important skills for Ukrainian journalists during this war, just to don't believe someone who said that it's no fear, we don't afraid something. The most important skill is just to overcome this fear every single day, and actually what we do, it's about that. And I also want to mention maybe a little bit about the team of Ukrayinska Pravda, because I think that everyone has its own way of this war and living during this war, and everyone has to think about their choices. It's one of the most difficult position maybe for journalists and for Ukrainian journalists as well, whether you're more journalist or whether you're more citizen, and you have this dilemma every single day as well. So even in our team we have this discussion, and for example, one of our reporters decided to join an army. So he is a prominent videographer, but for one day he just said, okay, I decided that it will be my impact to this war, because it's not about guilty, it's about my dignity of Ukrainian people, which we are standing for years and years and years. About life, or about Ukrainians who are abroad, I think that it's very important questions, just because we have more than 8 million people outside the country. And I think that it could be the next polarization of our country, because we now already have a discussion about inside Ukrainian society who decided to stay, for example, and who left the country with the beginning of the war. And that's why I think that media has to pay more attention on that specific area, just to build these bridges between Ukrainians who decided to stay and Ukrainians who left the country. I think that it could be a problem after the end of this war, after Ukrainian victory. Some people decided to come back, but it's also the question of importance of the future rebuilding system. We have to put an attention, because we now cover frontline, for example, but we don't have enough discussion in Ukrainian media about future recovery, future rebuilding projects, for example. I'm 100% sure that people will be not back without good infrastructure, without schools, without hospitals, and we have to start the discussion in media right now, because after the end of this war it will be too late. And without women and children, unfortunately, we will be not able to build prosperous and democratic country as Ukraine wants to be. So there maybe, yeah.
Can I add to that? Yeah. I think the polarization is one of the biggest issues, and it's not just between those who left and those who stayed, but it's also about people having very different experiences. Because as I said, someone took on a challenge to go to the front line and fight, and so did also one of our journalists who we're very proud of, and really waiting for him to come back to journalism, also safe. But you know, there are these choices as well. And there are smaller choices like, did you stay in Kyiv during the blackouts, or did you leave the country? Or did you leave to a safer place, or, you know, a brighter place? Or, you know, did you live on the first floor and you didn't have to come up 20 stairs every day? Or did you have to? Or did you have a child? Or did you have to make that choice of living or staying with your child and putting them at risk, or didn't you have that choice? And there are so many different experiences that I think that one of the main challenges for Ukrainian society will be trying to be finding similarities rather than the differences. And that's something I don't think we can do, but we as media, I think, have to also work on that. For us, the Ukrainians who left the country, you know, are not the target audiences, because they probably read Ukrayinska Pravda and other local Ukrainian media because they all speak Ukrainian. But at the same time, I think we are a tool for them because they all became the ambassadors of Ukraine abroad. And I think to be talking to the foreigners, they have to give them something. And I think we are the tool they're giving them as well. So that's how I see our role in that.
Can we talk a little bit about the business of journalism, because you launched, you know, just before the invasion, you know, and I know, like, you know, you played a leading role in really setting a lot of the infrastructure up so that you were set. But tell us, you know, some of the key elements of that, and what does it look like going forward?
I mean, business media is a business, but it's a pretty bad one. So I think everybody knows that, and especially challenging at the times of any crisis, but especially the crisis like this one of that scale. When we were starting, we were set up for the readers' revenue, of course. So we wanted to be readers' revenue driven, but at the same time, we expected, I mean, I personally expected to be successful in advertising, because we work with, well, pretty rich audiences comparing to Ukrainian audiences, and we thought that advertisers would be interested, and they were in the beginning. So just to give you a small example, in the first 3 months of our existence, we made the same amount of money on advertising as we made in the next year. So that's how the advertising market dropped, and we never gave up trying. We always tried to reach out to the new advertisers and partners and build that part of the business, but it's a struggle. And our readers' revenue, though, took off. When the invasion started, we had a one-time donation set up on the GoFundMe, and we had the membership model set up on Patreon. Back then, when we were setting it up, we didn't even have our own website, so that's why it's on the external platforms, but we are launching our own infrastructure for that very soon. But that took off, but the war fatigue was affecting that model a lot. So somewhere in the beginning of, on the end of May or the beginning of June, we hit our lowest. So we got 7,000 paying members, and then we were back to 6, I think. And it was dropping and dropping, and it was a scary process for us. So we changed the strategy overall. We focused very much on the reader revenue. It's our North Star goal, and we are trying to build a lot of activities and a lot of product around that. But at the same time, we understand that we can't put all the eggs in one basket, because that's too risky. So we try to diversify. We went into syndication. That's a big chunk of revenue for us. We still work with the advertising. We try to do other side businesses and try to experiment, and are still doing it. Looking forward, I think will be reader revenue based for the biggest part. But at the same time, I hope that we can experiment otherwise. For example, we had this very successful merchandise sales collection with the St. Javelin team. We partnered and created a special design that was the Archangel of Kyiv, Michael. And the merch collection was on sale. It was that design in different formats, but also just the Kyiv Independent merch, something like what I am wearing now. And it was on sale just for 3 months, and I think the total amount we donated all the profits to hospitaliers, and I think the general amount was around $30,000, which is a big impact project for us, but also shows a big success of a potential business stream, being e-commerce. So I think we'll be experimenting with that and maybe a couple of other things. I think there are a way to develop, but I think the main point is to not stop trying to diversify, because relying on just one revenue stream is very risky.
And are there questions? Okay, we'll certainly come to questions in a moment if there's mics going around. We have one, Miroslava at the front. Just before we get to the questions, just because UP was reliant on advertising predominantly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so how have you managed?
Yeah, now our model is a hybrid model, like with all media, for example, as Daryna mentioned before. So we have a support of donors, we have a support from our audience. We launched our Club of Readers, one of the first from Ukrainian media market. We also have some support from our Patreon. We are able to monetize our YouTube, which has become one a new media for us, more than 800,000 subscribers now. We have only in our YouTube page. And we are able to have some advertising support as well. So of course we were scared in the beginning of war, but actually our CEO is here inside this, and he is responsible for money in Ukrayinska Pravda. And he did a great job, and he does a great job during this year.
Okay.
Remarks that some foreigners discovered that Ukraine exists during this war. For years and years and years, Ukraine experienced coverage of foreign coverage of Ukraine from Moscow, and it was a huge problem for Ukraine, for Ukrainian citizens, and basically probably for the West as well, that they didn't understand Ukraine because it was not properly covered. My question to the panel, since the war began, there are thousands of journalists, foreign journalists came to the country to cover the war. Do you think they portray the war and Ukraine properly? And what do you feel lacking in their coverage, if there any lack of coverage? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
I'll take the first spin on it. I think it's a journey. I think there is progress. I remember how it was starting back in February and March. I just will tell you one story just for example. There was a journalist from, I think, Germany who called me and interviewed me. I was in Kyiv, and she goes, it was on the day that the Zaporizhzhia power plant was hit by a missile for the first time. And she goes, hello, where are you? I'm in Kyiv. And she goes, well, have you heard about the Zaporizhzhia power plant strike? I'm like, yes, of course. And she's like, how did you learn about it? I'm like, well, from the news. And she goes, well, have you heard it? I'm like, it's 600 kilometers away from me. Have you looked at Ukraine's map? And that's how I realized that people just discovered that Ukraine exists. And it was like that. There were so many calls like that people had no idea where Ukraine is, how large Ukraine is. I think the whole narrative about Ukraine, Kyiv falling in 3 days is also about, not just knowing that probably it's not even possible to go through Ukraine in 3 days. And, a lot of that came from just not knowing. I think it's a journey, and it evolved a lot, and people learned so much more about Ukraine. But in my humble opinion, I think what's lacking is the context. I think foreign media truly tried to do a good job and invested a lot of resources into coverage of Ukraine. And I know publishers who sent huge teams to Ukraine, even smaller publishers, bigger publishers as well. But at the same time, it's parachute visits. They still didn't set up, not all of them set up Kyiv bureaus like they had Moscow bureaus for decades and decades. And that lens is changing, but slowly. And, parachute visits are great, but they're parachute. That means you don't know the context. So more often than not, one politician will get portrayed as a war hero, and because they're not locals, they wouldn't know that he is actually not. He had pro-Russian views, or he was in corruption scandal and stuff like that. We as locals know that, and that's the context that we bring into the picture.
Yeah, I would say that, of course, it's much better than it was in the beginning of the full-scale war, and it's much better than it was in 2014, for example, because for me, this war, of course, and for Ukrainian, this war started in 2014 with the occupation of Crimea, and unfortunately, at the beginning, a lot of foreign journalists, they literally didn't understand what happened, and they also reported about kind of, like civil conflict, some clashes, separatists, etc. After 2022, it became more understandable for the rest of the world that it wasn't kind of something inside your country. Maybe I would love to also mention that for all Ukrainian journalists, from my perspective, I literally help some people just for better understanding. So I have some friends, foreign reporters. I have a lot of journalists abroad because I was a Nieman Fellow and a fellow at Reuters Institute. And actually, I literally help them and help them better understand my country with describing also the situation about Crimea, a situation with Crimean Tatars, what is the difference between like separatists and collaborators, etc. But sometimes you're literally faced with some stereotypes, with some no understanding. For example, even 2 weeks ago, I received a question from one reporter from Japan that why separatists and collaborators, they don't have an access to Ukrainian media and it was kind of, I was really surprised by this question. But of course, the easiest way just to stop communicate and just to stop answer this question. But for me, it's important just to clarify everything and to explain, to give a background.
Are there other questions?
Add a couple of thoughts, yeah. Yeah, we are about local media, but also have some experience. And actually, after the Memorial platform was launched, different journalists from different countries, they came with requests and they asked us to help them with some stories, contacts of Ukrainians who can share the stories. Yeah, and we started this collaboration with some media from Estonia, from Romania, and their stories that are prepared together with our journalists are okay. Yeah, we don't see some like misinformation there. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. We have two. Maybe we can take them just if you can do quickly, and then we can.
Yeah, my question is to Lera. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know the structure of your organization, or even what you are. Are you an association? Are you a membership organization? Are you a consultancy? Are you a cooperative? How does that work?
It's a great question. Okay, we are working as NGO, and with all this local media, we had like agreements, and this agreement is actually about we give them the access to this platform and different sources we could provide for them, and local media should use our editorial policy. And I mean like policy with journalist standards and ethics and all the stuffs, yeah. And in case if we see that media, for example, I don't know, in 1 year, somebody decided, oh no, I don't want to use journalist standards, we can close the access to the platform. The domain and content is still it's still belongs to this editorial office, but they and probably they could move to another platform like WordPress, for example, and have a new website, but without our identity and brand and other stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, it's in here.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to say thank you to today's speakers and their team for the great and important work you've been doing covering the war in Ukraine. I'm Lisa Bezushko from the Global Forum for Media Development. My quick question is, last year at this very festival, we've launched Perugia Declaration for Ukraine, which contains a call to action in support to several key media actors. And currently, we've been updating it and collecting the feedback from Ukrainian colleagues on what are the current needs. And my question is, what are, in your opinion, the main long-term goals of your media? So, thank you.
That's a lot of questions in one question, but I'll try to be quick. I think the main call to action, in my humble opinion, is, well, keep talking about Ukraine. It's important that you keep talking about it. I know that your audience is also tired of it. I know it's hard to find new angles, and there is only an extent to what you can make the war entertaining, but we ask you to keep talking because your attention is crucial for our victory. As for the needs, I think there are a lot of needs. I think a lot of Ukrainian journalists are now exhausted. I think there is a need to support all sorts of mental support programs, but more like tailored to a particular organization, not just a training or a retreat, but more like, well, give money to therapy for a whole newsroom, and that's something we've been looking for. But also there is always a need for institutional funding. I think there are a lot of programmatic funding with international donors, and unfortunately for a lot of us that's not working, because the main focus is the news and nobody's really interested to give the money to cover the news. But the news is something it's very crucial for us to do, and we cannot stop doing that. So that is something I've been stressing for quite a long time. And that's for the goals. I can tell for the Kyiv Independent. I think the main goal for us is to adjust for the post-war. I think to diversify the content, to diversify the revenue streams, to be prepared for when the war ends and we will have to serve same audiences but their different needs. I think that's what we've been trying to do. Thank you.
Do you want to add something quickly?
No, just solidarity and attention, the most important things for us in Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Daryna, Sevgil, and Lera. I think it's fair to say that, you know, the global journalism community is so incredibly proud of the work that you're doing, and we are, of course, cheering for you and here to help.